In the heart of New York City, where skyscrapers shimmer under the night sky, a story of love, fate, and redemption begins to unfold. The city never sleeps, much like the ambitions and restless hearts searching for something they can't quite name. And within its ceaseless rhythm, two people from entirely different worlds are about to collide in ways neither of them could have foreseen. Angelique Calliope, a brilliant marketing executive at Kingston Enterprises, is the epitome of intelligence and creativity. She isn't just exceptional at her job, she possesses a rare warmth that draws people toward her. Yet behind her gentle smile lies a past that few know about. Born into a struggling family in Ohio, her childhood was filled with fear. Her father, a man broken by alcohol, took out his frustrations on her and her mother. The nights of shouting, the unpredictable bursts of violence had become an all too familiar part of her life. Yet, Angelique refused to be defined by her suffering. She knew that knowledge was the only way out. She studied relentlessly, earned a scholarship to a prestigious university, and finally made her way to New York, where she built her career from nothing. She didn't just become successful, she used her position to support underprivileged children, knowing firsthand what it felt like to have no one to rely on. Opposing her in every way is Chad Kingston, the young and formidable CEO of Kingston Enterprises. Raised in a world of wealth and power, Chad was molded into a man who could not afford mistakes. Chad Kingston had everything: wealth, power, and an empire waiting for him. But what he lacked was warmth. Born into a family that valued dominance over love, he was taught that strength and control were everything. Emotions were weaknesses, and love was a liability. But Chad once believed in love, until Aimee Montgomery, the woman he cherished, betrayed him. For the sake of status and ambition, Chloe left him for a man with greater influence. The pain of her betrayal hardened Chad, making him vow never to be vulnerable again. From that moment, he became a machine, calculated, emotionless, and driven by nothing but ambition. But then, Angelique appeared, and everything in him began to waver. At Kingston Enterprises, Angelique Calliope was one of the most outstanding employees. She wasn't just incredibly creative. She carried herself with a level of professionalism that stood strong even under the most intense pressure. While Chad Kingston was a cold and demanding CEO, Angelique never showed fear nor let his intimidating presence shake her confidence. Chad wasn't the type of man to be easily impressed, but Angelique was different. She wasn't just competent, she was resilient. The way she handled intricate marketing strategies, the way she genuinely helped her colleagues, it all made him watch her more than he should. Though he never voiced his thoughts, Chad found himself drawn to Angelique in a way he hadn't been to anyone in years. He caught himself paying attention to her, seeking her out in meetings, noticing the way she carried herself. But instead of confronting his emotions, he chose to keep his distance, observing her in silence, refusing to acknowledge the unfamiliar pull in his chest. The opportunity for Chad to grow closer to Angelique came when Kingston Enterprises launched a major charity project. Angelique, with her dedication and passion, was placed at the forefront of the campaign. Her sincerity not only captured media attention, but also stirred something deep within Chad, something he thought had long been buried. He couldn't understand this feeling. Angelique was just an employee. She was supposed to be insignificant in his personal life. And yet, no matter how many times he told himself otherwise, he kept looking for her in every meeting, in every brief moment their paths crossed in the office. And just like that, fate had begun pulling them closer. The celebration party for Kingston Enterprises' successful charity project was held at the Crystal Haven, one of the most luxurious hotels in New York. The crystal chandeliers shimmered, soft music floated through the grand hall, blending with the lively chatter of employees raising their glasses in celebration of months of hard work. Among the crowd, Angelique Calliope looked effortlessly elegant in a modest blue dress, her soft waves cascading over her shoulders. She rarely attended such extravagant events, and tonight was no exception. Her plan was to make a brief appearance before returning to the office to finish her pending work. Meanwhile, Chad Kingston sat alone at the bar, his gaze distant as he observed the lively scene before him. Behind his composed exterior lay the heavy burden of responsibilities and the unhealed wounds of his past. With each sip of whiskey, his eyes grew darker, more clouded. After completing a few work tasks, Angelique returned to the ballroom to retrieve some documents she had left behind. She was about to leave when her eyes landed on Chad, sitting alone at the bar, his expression weary and lost. Despite everything she had heard about his cold demeanor, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. Stepping forward, she asked softly, "Are you all right, Mr. Kingston?" Chad looked up, his hazy eyes locking onto her face. A faint, bitter smile played on his lips. "You're still here?" Angelique nodded and pulled out a chair beside him. "You don't seem okay." Chad smirked faintly, pouring himself another drink. "You always work this hard?" Angelique smiled gently, though her eyes held concern. "Work is work, but I've never seen you drink this much before." He remained silent for a long moment before unexpectedly murmuring, "Do you think I'm a terrible person?" Angelique was caught off guard but quickly replied, "No, I've never thought that." Under the influence of alcohol, Chad suddenly grasped Angelique's hand, his deep eyes piercing into hers. "You're too naive, Angelique. You have no idea how cruel this world can be." She froze at his unexpected touch, her heartbeat racing wildly. A strange, fluttering sensation coursed through her veins as the world around them seemed to blur. Chad pulled her closer, his warm breath brushing against her ear, sending a wave of unease through her. "You're beautiful and pure," he whispered, his gaze filled with an intoxicating intensity. "Do you know that?" Angelique shivered slightly. She had never seen Chad like this before. The restraint he usually carried had completely vanished, revealing a man driven by raw, unfiltered desire. "You're drunk, Chad," she murmured, trying to maintain her composure. But he didn't let her finish. His lips found hers, tender yet urgent, breaking down every wall she had carefully built. Everything happened so quickly. The intensity of emotions swallowed her whole. And before she even realized it, Angelique found herself in a hotel room with Chad. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the luxurious hotel room. Angelique Calliope stirred slightly, her eyelashes fluttering as a wave of dizziness hit her. Fragments of last night's memories rushed back, the warmth of Chad's breath, the firm grip of his hands, and the unrestrained passion that had consumed them both. She turned her head to the side, her heart pounding, as her gaze fell upon Chad Kingston, still asleep. His face was calm, undisturbed, as if last night had been nothing more than a fleeting dream. But for her, it was a line she had never intended to cross. Panic surged through her chest. Angelique clutched the thin sheet around her, realization sinking in. She had lost herself in a moment of weakness. This couldn't change everything. It shouldn't. Carefully, she slipped out of bed, reaching for her wrinkled dress. Slipping it back on, she stole one last glance at Chad, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. The door clicked shut behind her. Last night was over, or at least, she tried to convince herself it was. Angelique Calliope walked into the office that morning, doing everything she could to compose herself. She pretended that last night had never happened, immersing herself in work. But no matter how much she tried, she could still feel Chad Kingston's gaze lingering on her. They said nothing, and yet the tension between them was undeniable. But things only got worse. Within days, rumors spread like wildfire throughout Kingston Enterprises. No one knew exactly where they started, but the hushed whispers, the sideways glances, and the judgmental stares made it impossible for Angelique to ignore. Tabloids were quick to jump on the scandal. Angelique Calliope, rising marketing star, or gold digger seducing the CEO. Chad Kingston, love-struck or playing a dangerous game of power. At the center of the storm, Amy Montgomery reappeared. Seizing the opportunity, she worked behind the scenes to fuel the rumors, ensuring that Angelique's reputation was dragged through the mud. Angelique had only one hope left, that Chad would say something, that he would stand up for her. But days passed. and he remained silent. Finally, unable to take it any longer, she stepped into his office, placing a white envelope on his desk. "You won't say anything, so I'll speak for you." Her voice trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady. Chad's eyes darkened as he stared at the resignation letter before him. "Are you running away?" Angelique inhaled deeply, forcing her voice to remain calm. "I can't stay in a place where everyone thinks I'm using you." She turned to leave. This time, Chad didn't stop her. And as the door slammed shut behind Angelique, he realized he had just lost the most precious thing in his life. Angelique Calliope left Kingston Enterprises without looking back. She knew she couldn't keep enduring the whispers, the judging stares, or the cruel rumors. But what hurt the most wasn't the gossip. It was Chad's silence. She returned to her hometown in Ohio, the place she had spent years trying to escape. But this time she wasn't running because she was weak. She was returning to find herself again. But the past had a cruel way of catching up. It didn't take long for her father, the man who had haunted her childhood with fear and pain, to find her again. "You think you can just leave me?" His voice slurred with alcohol, his bloodshot eyes filled with fury. Angelique instinctively stepped back, but she wasn't fast enough. His rough hand grabbed her wrist, pulling her back into the nightmare she had fought so hard to escape. Then the door burst open. Chad Kingston stood there, his eyes burning with fury. No longer the cold CEO, no longer the man who held back his emotions. He was a man who had lost the most important woman in his life, and he wasn't about to let that happen again. With a single, powerful punch, Chad sent the man stumbling backward. He reached for Angelique, pulling her to her feet, his voice steady, unwavering. "You don't have to endure this anymore. I'm taking you away." Angelique looked into his eyes, no distance, no hesitation. But she still couldn't bring herself to fully trust him. Her voice wavered as she whispered, "I need time." Chad didn't hesitate, his eyes unwavering. "I'll wait, no matter how long it takes." After leaving Ohio, Angelique Calliope decided not to return to Kingston Enterprises. She wanted to rebuild her life on her own terms, without being tied to the past or anyone else. She found a position at a small marketing firm in New York, a place where no one knew about the rumors or her connection to Chad Kingston. But nothing could stop Chad Kingston from finding her. He was no longer the cold, detached man she once knew. Instead, he was patient, quietly weaving his way back into her life, not as a powerful CEO, but as a man determined to change. He didn't pressure Angelique to come back to him. He was simply there, waiting outside her office after work, showing up at charity events she supported, helping whenever he could, never crossing the line, never demanding anything. One day, while Angelique was busy organizing a fundraising event for an orphanage, Chad arrived early. He wasn't in his usual tailored suit. Instead, he wore a simple button-down, sleeves rolled up, hands dusted with dirt as he helped set up the venue, a quiet, unseen force making things easier for her. When Angelique spotted him, she froze for a moment. This wasn't the Chad Kingston she once knew. She hesitated before asking, "What are you doing here?" Chad simply offered a small, genuine smile. "I just wanted to help." Angelique said nothing, but deep inside, something had begun to shift. Angelique Calliope didn't know when it had happened, when Chad Kingston had quietly become part of her life again. He never begged for forgiveness. He never forced her to come back. He simply stayed, patient, steady, showing her through his actions that he had truly changed. But just when Angelique felt herself beginning to trust him again, the news broke. Kingston Enterprises was on the brink of collapse. Stakeholders lost faith, major partners pulled out one by one, and the media painted Chad as a failing CEO, a man who had let emotions cloud his judgment, bringing his empire to ruin. Angelique watched from afar, a deep ache settling in her chest. She knew Chad was strong, but even the strongest man couldn't carry the weight of an empire alone. She told herself she had moved on, that this was no longer her fight. But when she saw the headlines, the way the media tore him apart, the exhaustion etched into his features every time he was caught in a photograph, something inside her twisted painfully. She had tried to walk away from him before. Could she do it again, knowing he was losing everything? Knowing that this time she could actually do something to help? And just like that, she realized she couldn't ignore him, not this time. At that moment, she remembered Bernard Hayes, a powerful investor she had once helped during a critical business deal. Back then, Bernard had told her, "If you ever need anything, just ask." Without hesitation, Angelique went to see him. She didn't plead for sympathy. She presented a clear, strategic recovery plan, believing that Kingston Enterprises still had a future. Bernard studied her for a long moment before smiling. "You're not doing this for yourself. You're doing this for him, aren't you?" Angelique didn't deny it. Days later, when Chad received news of an unexpected investment from Bernard Hayes, he was stunned. He had no idea how this had happened until he saw Angelique. She stood before him, unwavering. "Why did you do this?" His voice was rough, filled with unspoken emotions. Angelique took a steady breath before replying, "Because you deserve a chance to make things right." And in that moment, Chad knew he couldn't afford to lose her again. With Bernard Hayes' investment, Kingston Enterprises slowly reclaimed its power. The strategic plans Angelique Calliope had suggested were put into action, restoring the company's image and regaining the trust of key partners. The company wasn't just saved, it came back stronger than ever. Chad Kingston stood in his office, gazing out at the glittering New York skyline. His company had been saved. But he still hadn't won back the most important thing, Angelique. She still kept her distance. Though they had worked together, though she had helped him rebuild everything, she hadn't fully let him back into her heart. And Chad knew if he wanted her back, he had to prove he was worthy. And he knew exactly how to do it. A week later, at a major charity event, Angelique was busy coordinating the program when suddenly, the lights in the hall dimmed. She turned around in surprise, only to see Chad Kingston standing on stage, microphone in hand. Behind him, a massive screen lit up, showing images of snapshots of their journey together, the projects they had worked on, the moments they had shared. Chad took a deep breath before speaking, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "Angelique Calliope, you have always seen the real me, even when I couldn't see it myself. You saved this company, but more importantly, you saved me. And now I want to spend my life proving that I am worthy of you." The entire hall fell silent as Chad stepped down from the stage, walking towards her. Then, he knelt on one knee, flipping open a velvet box to reveal a shimmering engagement ring. "Angelique, will you marry me?" Angelique stood frozen. She had once thought that there was no happy ending for them. But now, looking into Chad's sincere eyes, she knew this wasn't the same cold man she had once known. She didn't need to say anything. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she gave a soft nod. Chad Kingston had changed, and this time, she was ready to believe in him. The hall erupted in applause as Chad smiled, pulling Angelique into his arms, kissing her deeply. This wasn't just a happy ending. It was a new beginning.